Welcome to Lesson 6, and this is where we're going to evaluate the theory properly and look at its strengths and weaknesses. Now, for this video, I'm going to use the strengths and weaknesses from the rsrevision.com website. It's absolutely fantastic. There is a lovely sheet that you should print out, wonderful notes for you to use as revision, and I've borrowed them extensively here. So I'm going to go over the strengths and the weaknesses separately and talk about them one by one. And the first thing is that situation ethics is a personalist theory that cares more about people than it does about rules. It focuses on bringing about positive outcomes. It's teleological in focus. And that means that it's an ethical theory that actually improves the world. Also, it's situationist, fairly obviously from the name, and this seems to be appropriate given that this looks like it's Jesus's approach in the New Testament. It's also more useful in the modern world, and this links on to the next point, which is that it is relativist and it allows people to make individualized responses to different ethical issues in different contexts. Situation ethics is also concerned with motive, which is something that utilitarianism isn't that bothered with, and that seems to be important. That looked like an oversight in utilitarianism, and that has been rectified now in situation ethics. Situation ethics is also autonomous. It focuses on the individual and allows the individual to make their own decisions, which seems appropriate in the modern world. It's good for, as Robinson describes, a man come of age who doesn't have to simply follow the rules, which seems something that belongs to a bygone medieval era. It is pragmatic, so it focuses on solutions that actually work, and it's up to date. It allows Christianity to change and stay in touch with the ethical views of wider society. It focuses on love, and it seems difficult to think of a better basis for ethical decision making. It certainly appears to be better than basing our ethical decision making on pleasure or happiness, which utilitarianism does. Now, if we look at the weaknesses, firstly, there's a total lack of rules. Now, rules are actually useful, not least because it's supposed to be a Christian ethical theory, and there are the 10 Commandments amongst many others, and they aren't the 10 suggestions. There are clear rules in Christianity. Rules also help us to think clearly, and one of the major problems with situation ethics is that its recommendations are very, very vague. It's incredibly difficult to know what the most loving thing to do is in any given situation. Also, because there are no moral lines in the sand, it would seem to allow terrible acts as long as we can justify them by saying it's the most loving thing. And linked to that, there's a lack of objective standards. Many Christians believe that the world is structured so that there are moral laws that are equivalent to physical natural laws, such as gravity. I talked about this right at the start of this series of YouTube videos. If you go back and look at Do Moral Laws Exist, for instance, in that video we talk about, well, are there absolute moral laws or not? And for absolutists, situation ethics is a total failure. For other groups of Christians, most notably the Catholics, the principle that the individual, and we'll come on to that in a second, but the individual can make complex moral decisions seems to ignore or isolate the role of the church. You've got thousands of years of tradition that just seem to be ignored. Focusing on this idolization of the individual, it seems as though the church community and the work of scholars and ethicists and philosophers is rejected on a principle of, well, we'll seem to know what the most loving thing is. That seems perhaps a tad arrogant and a little bit hopeful. We could also say that situation ethics can lead to unfair decision making because it doesn't force us to treat everyone in exactly the same way. This of course is also a strength, but you can see how it might be seen as unfair to punish one person very harshly for the same offence that you let someone else off. Importantly, it's also baseless. Fletcher just assumes that love is the most important thing or the telos of ethical decision making, and he puts that in one of his four presuppositions. It's his positivistic claim. But because he asserts that without evidence, we are justified in rejecting it without evidence as well. It is not clear that love is the only basis upon which ethical decisions should be made. There are some more weaknesses as well to situation ethics. Its focus on motive can also be seen as a problem. We've previously identified it as a strength, but the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So just because we're acting out of a good motivation, that doesn't really mean anything if the consequences are still negative, so someone like a utilitarian might want to argue. Speaking of which, we aren't angels, and we can't really be trusted. Despite what Robinson hoped, and despite what Fletcher hoped, we can't really be trusted to act out of our best interests all the time, or the best interests of other people all the time. Perhaps this theory would work for a man come of age, but I really don't think we're there yet. This could be an ethic that allows us to justify selfish and indulgent activities. It's perhaps a tad unfair to label that as situation ethics, which very clearly says that we shouldn't do that, but it's a theory that is apt for misuse. It's certainly much easier to misuse this than it would be some strict deontological ethics like Kantian or Catholic ethics. And then finally, we could say that it is irrational because it's so heavily subjective that doesn't seem to work in the long run. Now, there's a huge amount of points there, and if you get asked this to evaluate the strengths and weaknesses, for example, as an AO2 answer, you aren't really going to have the time to go into all of those individual details. So what I'm going to do here is just sketch out an overview of an AO2 answer. And what I've done is select a handful of key points. And hopefully I'm going to show you, therefore, how to structure an effective top-level answer. So the first thing I would do is say, well, there are some massive strengths of situation ethics. It's personalistic. This is one of the four presuppositions. This is something that Jesus would approve of because he said that Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. And it's also something that a secular thinker in the modern age would be impressed with because it gives the individual a huge amount of autonomy, and that can only be described as a good thing. However, the lack of rules is also a problem, so I'm getting in there immediately with an evaluation. I'm not waiting for the conclusion, I'm evaluating straight away and I'm putting in some counterpoints. Rules are useful. Christians are supposed to follow rules such as the Ten Commandments. Also, not having rules makes it much more difficult to work out what the right thing to do is. Situation ethics is not a substantive ethic but a method, and therefore it's very vague. It doesn't give clear direction. And we're no angels, so maybe we can misuse this theory. Its lack of rules might actually be a significant problem. Then I'm going to move on to something else. I'm going to say, well, situation ethics is teleological. It's trying to actively improve the world. It is an ethic that should make the world a better place to live in. And along those lines, one of the four presuppositions is that it's pragmatic. It should focus on theories that actually work. However, there are problems with this as well. The road to hell is paved with good intentions, so the focus on motive isn't that useful. We aren't very good at predicting what the most loving thing is going to be. Any consequentialist theory is going to struggle with the same problem, and because we're no angels, the focus on motive isn't going to work. Also, because there are no moral rules and because it justifies everything, the end justifies the means, this can allow potentially horrendous actions like adultery, theft, lying, or murder. Now that is a huge range that I've covered there, and there's a clear flow in the argument. And then finally, I need to come up with a personal conclusion. So I would say something like, despite the fact that situation ethics appears to be a wonderful theory, I believe it is a great idea that does not work in practice, despite its emphasis on consequences and pragmatism. The fact is, humans need rules to follow, otherwise, chaos will ensue. It's a very conservative point I'm making, but this is going to be useful as a conclusion for the essay. Now, I'm not saying that these are the best points to pick, but they're just ones which made sense for me, and this is a fluent, good essay structure, which I believe if you elaborated on in the time that you've got, would get you very high marks indeed.